Thank you for tuning in and welcome back to the channel. My name is Drydick. If you're new here, I do videos about different Diablo 1, Diablo 2, and World of Warcraft mods. If any of that sounds interesting to you, consider subscribing below, as there'll be many more videos in the future. Alright guys, welcome to the new video. This is going to be a little bit different than what I normally do on my channel. This is going to be more of like a talking head style video. It's me interviewing a healing officer from a guild that I've seen around the server so far. And as my guild is approaching the precipice of actually pushing into heroic content ourselves, I just wanted to run a few questions by him, get his opinion and his input on some of the things that I have wondered myself about the heroic raiding scene, and maybe give you guys and myself some insight on what it takes to actually be a heroic raider in the current scene of Project Ascension. It's gonna be me just farming Underbog here in the background, so don't feel like you have to watch the video itself. It's just some background footage to keep you guys entertained. You can pull this off onto your second monitor or off on your phone and listen to it in the background as well. I hope you guys enjoy this video, and comment below if you'd like to see a little bit more of this type of stuff in the future. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye. If you'd like, you can give your in-game name. If not, that's fine. We're just going to be doing an interview here really quick with a guy that I had found on World Chat. He is a current heroic raider. What's your guys' current progress so far in heroic raiding?
For heroics, we have done 6 out of 11 on Karazhan. We have done 2 out of 2 on heroic Gruul, both 10 and 25 minutes.
Fantastic. Okay, awesome. So let's go ahead and just get into the basic questions here. I'm just going to let you speak freely and just answer as much as you'd like. You don't have to give any way of you guys' very particulars about your raids. I'm not going to really particularly ask about builds, just more general questions. So we'll start off with current raid times and how long do you raid per night?
For our guild, usually it's on weekends. That's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Roughly 4 hours. Sometimes days are shorter, some days are longer, depending on if people have time. So we make adjustments based off of the entire team.
Okay. Do you guys have mostly older players, as in the 25 to 35 age range, like we do?
We actually have a pretty large range. We have some OG players from I would say probably like 30 to 40, and then we do have the younger crowd, 20s and stuff. So we have a large expanse.
Do you guys ever feel like your raid times are too constrictive or conflict with any people's schedules?
If we ever do have conflicts, we try to accommodate that. Like, for example, one person has a job where every other week they can raid. So what we try to do in those occasions is have some backup people, like some bench people that are willing to step in. So that's what we try to do. And then for the most part, we kind of understand real life takes prio. So to our best of the ability, we try to make raids fit everyone's schedule, which obviously is a little bit difficult, but for the most part, we can make do.
For sure. Yeah, we try to do the same thing. We'll go ahead and move on to the next question. So as an officer, what do you think has been your biggest contributing factor in progression to heroics versus normal?
For contributing, I would say testing. I spend a lot of time with guildies, helping them test their builds, see what does and does not work. Also, trying to squeeze out as much synergy across the raid, because for 10-man, you want to make sure that everyone is helping everyone versus just being greedy and only trying to benefit themselves. So yeah.
Would you mind expanding on that just a little bit as far as spreading the energy out? So are you trying to say that you'd rather have, like, let's say your DPS team is 5 to 6 people, having everyone doing 5k versus 3 people doing 2k and 1 person doing 10k?
So I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about in specifics. So me as a healer, if I feel like my healing is good enough, I will then start taking out points from my build to pick up, for example, Manatide Totem, right? So if my build I don't need the mana tide. My build is fine. But if I can help give mana to my DPSers, which requires them to life tap less, obviously life tapping less equals higher DPS for them. So stuff like that. So, but obviously, it's kind of like a give and take. Some people may feel like they can't afford to lose those points, but for me, I feel like my build's good enough to heal. So I start moving those points into more what's it called? Just more synergy for everyone.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
that's that's a good attitude to have. I've also been trying to do that for my own raid, but I always get a little bit of pushback from people thinking that they need these certain abilities or these certain talents, but in reality, it could potentially lead to better performance throughout the raid. Have you how do you approach that as an officer, especially in someone trying to progress heroic? About looking at people's builds, maybe changing a couple points here and there to increase the overall synergy.
So uh, we don't really try to force people to change. Um, it's kind of like a give and take. Obviously, some fights are more forgiving than others, and if push comes to shove, though, we will not necessarily force people, but like for example, some fights melee is just not, it's just not as good. So we'll spend a week or two getting all the gear for a guy to swap to caster or ranged, and so for that specific fight, they have the ability then to change for that fight. Um, and like I said, it's kind of like a as you go sort of thing. Like you have to see like what people are willing to do, willing to change up, and yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense, man. I get it. How did you guys overcome the initial spike in difficulty going from normal to heroic?
So a lot of it is trial and error because of new mechanics. So if it was going from normal to heroic with no new mechanics and just higher, just difficulty as in like damage output, then it's not as bad. But when they start throwing in the new mechanics, that's where, since you don't know what to expect, that requires a lot of wiping because of a new surprise. And then you have to learn what it does, how it works, and then how to overcome it. Um, and as long as, like I said, as long as your team performs well together, you can slowly start to chip away and then eventually make progress on that.
Okay, sure. I'm trying to think if I have any clarifying points. I mean, I guess that makes sense because if it's just a carbon copy of the fight and just the tanks get
Mm-hmm.
hit more, the healing's a little bit more intense, and the enrage timer's a little bit tighter. I guess it really
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter as much until you throw in the custom mechanics that the server is known for.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Next question: does your raid prioritize performance over pleasure when it comes to heroic raiding?
So when it comes to heroics, quality of life does matter, and I'm assuming that's what you mean by pleasure. Or what do you define as pleasure when you're talking about that?
Sure. Yeah. What I guess what I mean is more um, like having somebody who wants to play a certain build and have certain REs or certain talent points that is more for like flavor and fun rather than raw performance.
Okay. Yeah, so when it comes to flavor and fun, I would say in terms of heroic rating, that is probably going to be a no-go. Um, because if you could just make a simple switch of one RE to another, that is obviously going to be the better route. Now, when I think of pleasure, I think of quality of life, and something I can think of would be if switching an RE might lower your DPS, but if it allows you to focus more on the mechanics of a fight, then overall it might actually increase your DPS because then if you don't mess up a mechanic and die, obviously being dead is zero damage, but also if simplifying your build to allow you to do good damage, but then like I said, also focus on the mechanics, that's where I would say like quote unquote pleasure for me specifically. That would be the definition for me is the quality of life.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I've always wondered that myself because as a player who has rated pretty hardcore, if you will, over the years, even in the early days of retail TBC, I always would I would always pick performance over I guess if you want to say the fun of it, but I find the fun in optimization and pushing as hard as I can. That's where I find my fun for the most part, and I always find that sometimes it's hard to convince people to maybe change their mindset going into like harder content that requires that sort of optimization.
Yeah, and also too, when it comes to performance, as you get more comfortable, that's when you can start. That's when you can start getting more technical on your build. Because as you get more comfortable, then you don't need to have like all the extra REs that might make your build weaker. Because then you can actually not be stressed out of the new mechanics and go with the flow and the keys kind of just like you don't have to focus on what ability to use when. So as you get better, people I think naturally start to focus more on performance because it's just easier to perform at that time.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So how do you guys go about choosing what builds you bring to the heroic raids, especially for progressing on a new fight that you guys are attempting?
Okay, so when it comes to builds, people just play what they like to play, and then from that selection, we kind of pull together. Usually, it's a mix. I know some people like to, let's say, for example, go all hunters, right? For our guild, we don't have every single person being hunter, not because of not because that we don't want or need everyone to be hunters, but um, we just don't have that option. So if people want to play casters, that's fine as long as they are pulling their own weight. That's fine. And then when we go from there, we just try to uh, make sure the entire team can work together to give everyone else a helping hand. So, like I said, as I stated before, whether that means having people pick up mana tides to make sure that the casters topped off on mana, whether that having a melee pick up sunders so that the hunters can do more damage with their auto attacks, stuff like that. So we just take what we got, throw it together, and then just try to get that synergy flowing.
Okay, okay. I mean, that makes sense. Um, do you find that letting people play the builds that they want, who I guess motivates them to keep coming back and playing, and then trying to optimize the synergy with those builds, outperforms maybe giving people builds wholesale and just tell them play this because it performs, at this level?
Yeah, if someone's more comfortable playing a build, usually that leads them to perform better, even if that build's suboptimal. If they're more comfortable with that, usually it means that they'll wind up doing better anyways. But that there is a point where it's kind of like diminishing return. That there's only so far you could push specific builds. So if a person gets more comfortable practicing those other builds that might be better, then they can eventually make the transition. But usually, if a person is comfortable with some builds, we just push it as high as we can possibly get it, and then wherever the ceiling is, that's just kind of where they get capped out at.
Okay, that makes sense. Awesome. Okay.
Mhm.
As a follow-up question to that mindset, have you ever forced any players to abandon specs or playstyles to progress further in raids?
Um, Forced, no, but as I've said before, uh, some fights are not as friendly as others. Let's say, for example, a melee fight. Um, we have asked them if they're willing to change, and if they agree, we'll spend a week or two collecting all the gear, and and we don't usually have issues having people swap because, for example, also the most recent changes, it kind of nuked a lot of the top performing builds, and because they got nuked, we have to figure out either ways to re-optimize them, or if they're just in shambles, then we would just start from scratch again. And we don't really have an issue with forcing people. It's just we just kind of like realize that, hey, we got to make some changes and do what we can to make the best out of the situation.
Sure, sure. So with the current or the latest changes, as far as it impacts your raid, how much performance did you guys end up losing on your top end?
So I would say with the current changes, it seemed as though they tried to target the holy cats, uh, and as a consequence, holy bears got nerfed. And one of the major benefits as a holy bear was they could generate a lot of threat. And if your tank can generate a lot of threat, that allows your DPS to not have to throttle back either on damage or using feigned deaths and waiting like 3 seconds. They can just continuously output damage. So when it comes to stuff like that, I would say our DPS, even if the DPS didn't get nerfed, even though they have, but we can get into that later. But because of the fact that the tank generates less aggro, that requires us to throttle back damage, and it's not that it's undoable. It just makes the fights a little bit more. You have to really fine tune that aggro. So
So I've just briefly spoken with other friends in the server who raid heroics, and some of the consensus that I've gotten as far as touching on your the tanks being able to pump more threat, therefore being able to get more damage out. By what I understand, and they could just be misleading me, that a lot of the more high-end guilds are utilizing hunters specifically for misdirection and being able to just chain 3 to 4 misdirects onto their tank, allowing the tank to be more of a survival-based tank and not have to worry so much about threat. So they're more or less sacrificing build diversity to help facilitate higher threat for their tanks. So you achieve the same goal by getting more DPS from a more threat based on your tank, but they are sacrificing a little bit on the build diversity apparently.
yeah, that's what I was talking about earlier. That some guilds they run all hunters, and hunters perform good, and also the fact that yes, you can then have all your hunters give misdirects to the tank. So if a tank, let's say for example, a parry tank, parry tanks perform parry tanks perform very well. They can survive and avoid damage, and they're overall good, but they do lack a little bit on the aggro side. Now, if your guild is running either all hunters or a lot of hunters, you can then supplement the aggro with the misdirects. Now, when it comes to our team, I think we only have 2 hunters. So having the holy bear at the time before the nerfs, the holy bear could generate enough threat for itself that it didn't require all that assistance. So 2 hunters was fine. But now that we have to either change up the build or we're considering trying out the new shield tank because shield tank got the recent buff, we think that either shield tank might start becoming more meta over bears.
Understandable. I have been trying to champion shield tanks myself for quite a while, and I've even suggested some things to the devs that could potentially fix it. I am looking forward to seeing how they do perform, because I personally feel that getting into heroic, the shield tanks just are a little bit too weak on the survivability side, even though they generate decent threat.
Yeah. Before the changes, I would say there was very few shield tanks, but after the new changes, with some testing, I think they should start competing with the other tanks.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Okay, so moving on to the next question. Did all your raiders have the same desire to push heroic content, or was it something you guys slowly grew into?
So for pushing heroic content, we all had the same understanding that we wanted to do heroics, and I joined a guild that was suffering a little bit, and people at the time were unwilling to make some compromises to their builds to kind of help progress, and that's whenever we actually broke off from that guild and started our own guild because, like I said, we wanted to push heroics, and sometimes you have to make adjustments to facilitate that. And so whenever we made our own guild, everyone was kind of on the same page that this is what we want to do, and then slowly started to recruit people, and now we're at the point that we have actually 2 10-mans that are progressing, and like I said, we have also done the 25 gruel, and then we pick up a couple of extra people to fill those last remaining spots.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I've been trying to get a read on my guild personally about people's desire to actually push that heroic content because I mean, as a personal aside, I like to try to strive to beat the hardest content the game has to offer. That's how I find a lot of enjoyment. Whether or not many people share that same desire, that's why I was wondering how you guys came about to maybe how you went about recruiting beforehand of getting in, or trying to assess people's desire to actually tackle that content, because it can be very frustrating coming from someone who has spent a couple months on a single boss at a time in retail WoW during various different expansions to keep people there while you just continuously die and die and die to the same boss every week. It can get quite frustrating.
Yeah, frustrations on bosses do occur, but you have to have the understanding that as long as you're willing to keep in mind that other people have done it, because that's the one thing too. Like if no one has cleared the content, then it's a little bit daunting, because it's like, well, if the best of the best haven't cleared it, then we probably can't. But that you should still try. But when other guilds have cleared it, then it's definitely possible. You just have to figure out what that formula is to start making that progress. So
Sure, that makes sense. So how do you keep your raiders motivated to keep throwing their face into a boss over and over each night, even if a kill doesn't happen for, say, a couple weeks at a time?
usually breaks. So even if it's like a 5-minute breather, sometimes you need that. You need to walk up, stretch around, grab a drink, because when things get tough, as people get stressed out, they start to make more mistakes. So sometimes you just need like a little breather, and I would say that's probably the best thing. Is just take some time, relax, and everyone kind of just reset themselves.
So outside of just in the immediate senses, if you're in that raid for that night, more long term, I guess, how do you keep people interested to be like, oh, great, another weekend where we, wipe on Moreau's for 3 hours a night? How do you get people to continue to log in and sort of see the light at the end of the tunnel, if that makes sense?
Um, I would say if you're hard stuck on one boss, do a couple of pulls, and if you feel like you're not making progress, then just do like a different raid, whether that be Gruul, whether that be Mag, and then come back to it. Because eventually, like I said, if you continuously go at that same boss for hours on end, and then even with those like 5-minute breaks every now and again, it still becomes stressful. So then just say, hey, today we're going to take a break from Kara. We're going to do, Gruul, or we're going to do Mag and stuff like that too. Just to kind of break it up a little bit, because, like I said, over time, if you guys keep on hitting that brick wall, the frustrations do build.
Yeah, that's understandable. I always pull on my experience with retail TBC back before they did the global like 15% HP nerf on bosses towards the tail end of BT. My guild and I were struggling to try to kill Archimond in Mount High Jal before they nerfed it, kind of as like a badge of honor, like, hey, we killed one of the hardest bosses before they nerfed it. And I remember Probably taking close to 6 months just on that boss alone. We could get to him within an hour of our raid time, and we usually raided 3 to 4 hours, kind of, 2 or 3 times a week. And we would spend anywhere from 6 to 12 hours a week just on this one boss. And I think, maybe as people have gotten older, with more responsibilities, people just want to see more immediate progress. Back when you're 18, you really don't have anything else to do. It's not that big of a deal, but when you're, 30 like I am, it's a little bit harder to convince people to, keep going to the same raid for so long and not see any progress.
Yeah, and also too, when it comes to specific bosses, if you're getting stonewalled, you have to make sure to assess what is going wrong. Because if no one is either, because a lot of people will they will log their fights, so then they can actually precisely see what's going on at all times. And then after the raid's done, you look at those logs, you see, okay, here's our tanks, how much damage are they taking, can we improve on reducing damage, here's what our healers are doing, is there anything we can improve on them, whether that means increasing their output or maybe even swapping their builds to something that might suit the fight better, whether that's single target or more raid-wide healing. Because if you can't see what is going wrong, then it's just kind of like it's not pointless, but it's a lot more difficult to make that change that's needed, because it could be something simple, but you got to make sure that you know what is going on, what's the weak link, in order to focus on that, and yeah, making sure that you're logging what's going on in the fight.
Okay, that makes sense. I want to touch on something you'd mentioned earlier, specifically about when we were discussing like builds and play style. I'd like to maybe ask you if you're okay with sharing a little bit of detail, specifically just about what you're playing personally, as far as like a healing officer in your guild, to maybe give people a framework to maybe base the mindset or the thought process that goes into building a heroic raiding healer.
So my build is Holy Light, and more specifically crit base, and I believe my crit in a raid setting is about 87% crit chance on my Holy Light.
That's impressive.
Yes. And as a Holy Light healer, I probably would say that is the best single target or tank specific healing. And you couple that usually with someone who can then obviously help the raid, whether that be the Renew Greater Heal spec, which is the new RE. What's it called? Let me look it up real quick.
Sure, no problem. I know which one you're talking about, but I can't remember it off the top of my head either.
Yeah, so the Faith Rekindled with the Holy Radiance, which allows your renews to last longer, and then when you heal with Greater Heal, Flash Heal, or Penance, they get that splash heal. So you can run that as your kind of like your raid healer. You can also use Chain Heal. That's one of the other popular ones. It's the Chain Heal / Lesser Healing Wave. There's also the Healing Wave that couples with the Ancestral procs. Those are kind of like the three choices when it comes to like raid healing. And then other fights do require more specialty, like Hots healing. I would say for all except for one is probably not good, but they do occasionally shine. And in most fights you can do 2 healer setups, but some require 3. And usually when you bring in that third healer, it's in the form of Power Word Shield. And what Power Word Shield allows you to do is put the shield on the entire raid and give that preemptive healing, because giving everyone like an extra buffer zone helps a lot, because if someone takes 8k damage, you have to backfill that. But if you can already give them an 8k shield and then they go down to 100% life, that's way better. So
Yeah, I've heard really good things about the power word shield healing. My personal experience with healing on Ascension so far has been a druid based hot healer, but it was really specialized at specifically just raid wide healing with assisting with mana regen and energy regeneration through the talents that give energy and mana and stuff like that. It was more along lines of like say like a bard healer from Final Fantasy
Yep.
11. There was some decent healing. I could keep a tank alive if I really had to, but it was more supporting the raid and the other two healers, and it seemed to work well in our environment because we were kind of lacking healers there for a while. But our current healing roster, we have our main healer. He rotates between like a greater heal tank healing build and a prayer of healing AoE build, and then our other two healers are essentially playing different versions of a hot based healer.
Yeah,
And
I
we
would say I was gonna say when it comes to 10-man, pots don't perform well except for heroic Magtheridon. There's specific interactions that allow them to basically be the best, and the other situation would be like a 25-man. That's also where a HOTS healer would really shine. But when it comes to 10-man heroics, I would say HOTS are definitely, like I said, besides specific fights like Mag heroic, they just there's no room for them, sadly. If you like playing HOTS.
yeah, no, I understand, and it kind of bums me out because I was always a druid healer in any expansion. So when you say they really don't have any room, do you really mean not because their healing output can't be good? It's just more the damage output is more demanding immediate healing to not. To counteract these mechanics, more or less, like everybody's taking more burst damage, not sustained damage, so you need to be able to get that people up, within a second or two window, where HOTS just kind of they can't really fill that very well as other healers
Yeah,
like healing Holy Light or like a chain heal.
yeah, exactly. So on fights that have that slow ticking death, like Mag, that's where a HOTS can help. But yeah, on other fights where the entire raid takes that sudden, 50% damage or whatever, that's where you need the instant heals, whether it be from a chain heal or the healing wave with the ancestral procs, or whether it be the renew / greater heal combos. That's where you need the heals. You need them now. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess another follow-up question to that would be, considering we've touched on, I guess, kind of like the main healing specs that I've personally seen and spoken with other healers from other guilds as well. Um, where where do you feel that the healing meta is right now as far as the power distributor among the different specs, and if there is any one spec that you would either change or modify, and in what way?
I would say healing right now feels actually really good. Most fights, um, they don't feel overwhelming. I would say the most overwhelming fight right now is usually stuff like Morose, where everyone has the food debuff, and if they get unlucky and they can't find their food in time, that's kind of it's not really a healer issue as it is like a person finding their food, but that can be stressful sometimes. But yeah, overall, I would say healing is it usually is in a pretty good spot.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know. I've also been wondering that because I'm not a main healer. I'm mostly a tank and DPS. I've always wanted to hear it from a different perspective as far as the overall balance of the healing archetypes. I'm glad to hear that at the higher levels, people feel like there's enough representation of different playstyles.
Yeah, and then when it comes to like other healers besides like the holy light, like I said, the renew greater, it's still strong. It was kind of unfortunate that they nerfed the what's it called, the Kindle, or not Kindle, yeah, faith rekindled. They nerfed it from a 2 second down to a 1.5. It's still good. It's still usable. It's just kind of unfortunate that they nerfed it a little bit. But even that build's still good. Healing Wave with the Ancestral procs is really strong. I know a lot of people run that. And as I stated before with the HOTS, it's usually not used in a 10-man except for the Magtheridon fight. So that is nice that if you do like running HOTS, there's something to look forward to, that you're going to be the Knight in Shining Armor, I guess, in that fight. But yeah, overall, healers are doing pretty well.
That's good to hear. That's awesome. So we've been doing this for about 35 minutes, so we'll go ahead and kind of bring this to an end, and I'll leave you off with one other question, and we can end off that. What is some advice to players who've experienced normal or pug raids that want to try pushing into heroics for themselves?
I would say if you ever have done pugs, the experience you have in a pug is definitely not going to be the experience you have when you form your own 10-man, because having that synergy between everyone could take a build from doing 3k DPS up to 6k, literally just by having everyone work together and everyone help each other. So don't think that your pug experience is going to be the same as your heroic or flex, or once you form your own team. And find people that you like playing with, because that also matters. If you don't like the people that you like playing with, then it becomes more stressful than it needs to be. So
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. I can definitely attest to a good environment usually breeds better performance for sure. If you don't want to raid with the people, you're not going to want to perform very well.
Yep. Just find people that you like playing with, and form a nice 10-man and start chipping away and making progress.
Sweet, man. All right. Well, thank you again for doing this. I'm looking forward to maybe getting in touch with maybe your tanking officers and some of your higher end DPS, because I'd really love to maybe get their perspective on this as well. But we'll go ahead and call it there. Thank you again for doing this. I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, not a problem.
All right, man. You enjoy the rest of your night. Thanks for coming by, and hope you guys liked the video. Enjoy the rest of your night. Bye-bye.